Welcome to Module 6 on the STEPS training, which is covering leadership, governance and policy. So there needs to be a really consistent approach and a clear policy leading to the shared values of the school, agendas, actions and responses. So this gives you a clear picture explaining how to change the behaviour culture in the school. So culture in the middle with policy and plans around the outside. So policy and plans includes behaviour policy, training and information, so the information that we get regularly about particular children, our STEPS training and also our CPOMS training, leadership and management, and you can see how they all encompass each other surrounding the culture of the school, which is the most important part. And there is a huge emphasis on policy and ensuring that policy is delivered thoroughly across our school and ensuring that we know exactly what the policy means and the procedures around the policy so that we're ensuring that we all have consistency and a consistent approach across the school. So this slide covers how different parts of the policy and different parts of leadership and management, training information and policy and plans. So training and information should provide knowledge and skills. Leadership and management should provide the authority and accountability, and policy and plans should provide a clear, unambiguous job description that we're all fully aware of, that we follow the same structure of the behaviour policy. So again, talking more about consistency, clear policy leads to shared values, agendas, actions and responses. Policy is pivotal in ensuring that we are fully aware of protocol and expectations. In order to uphold the school's rules and procedures, we must make sure that a message is clear from all of the staff in school, and including making sure that the parents are aware of our policy too. So let's spend a bit of time looking at policy and thinking about what that means. So policy is what we do for children, not what we do to children. That's the most important part for us to remember. We're making sure that we're providing a structure for the children to follow to ensure that they are upholding the values of the school and the behaviour expectations. It's not what we do to children and the consequences that we put in place. It's what we provide for them and the structure to make sure there is a consistent approach across our school. So within STEPS, they provide a policy structure that can help us to make and create our own behaviour policy. So they're broken down into different sections. So section 1 is visions and values statement. Section 2 is pro-social behaviour, which we'll come back to in a moment. Section 3 is supporting all learners. Section 4, unsocial behaviour. Section 5, antisocial behaviour. Section 6, unforeseeable behaviour. Section 7, communication and recording within school. Section 8, communication with parents and carers. Section 9, which is exclusion. So this is a structure, a policy structure that we can use and adopt to our own behaviour policy following the STEPS therapeutic approach. So let's take a look at section 2 in a bit more detail, which is pro-social behaviour. So within this, we're thinking about how pro-social behaviour is understood, motivated and valued within the school or setting. We need to include a list of behaviours promoted and valued within the school. Staff response is expected to acknowledge, promote and consolidate the listed pro-social behaviours. So what we need to consider is, have we defined pro-social behaviour? Have you grouped pro-social behaviours in graduated levels and identified staff responses at each level? So that means, what are the levels of behaviour we're expecting in our school, and where do children go if behaviour is escalated? So what are the levels? Do they go to the Key Stage 1 leader first? Do we know where they go after that? When do they go to Melissa? When do they come to SLT? Do staff understand expectations and responses to all of our stated and valued pro-social behaviours? So what responses are we having for the children? What STEM sentences are we using? Have we communicated these responses that are essential to motivate pro-social behaviours? Have we identified accountability? Who is responsible for each action? All adults, class teacher, middle manager, etc. So what we're going to do is we're going to provide to you a copy of our behaviour policy. Have a look at what the consideration points. See if you can highlight or identify each of these points within our behaviour policy. The idea of this activity is for you to become really familiar with our behaviour policy within school and the expectations to make sure that this is embedded within all of the staff around school, so there is a more consistent approach. Pause the video to have some time to think about our behaviour policy. So now we're going to come on to pro-social and anti-social language. The language behind and the language that we should be using and the language that we shouldn't be using when addressing difficult or dangerous behaviours. So a question to get us thinking fast. When faced with difficult or dangerous behaviour, what could we say or do to make it worse? What could we say to make it worse? What language could we use that may make difficult or dangerous behaviour worse in a child? Have some time to think and share your ideas. So let's look at some negative phrasing and thinking about what that could be. So when we're thinking about language, we want to come away from negative phrasing, which we'll come on to in a moment. Giving children no choice or an open choice could cause more anxiety for children and could cause them to escalate even more. Empowering behaviour. Are we encouraging that behaviour with the children with the language that we're using? Escalating scripts. Are we giving them the knowledge or the time to escalate and take the behaviour further by not de-escalating? And it's also thinking about the zones of regulation. Is it appropriate time to be talking to them about that? If the children are at a crisis point, we understand that that's not the best time to talk to them. We need to give them time to calm themselves down and get themselves back into that green zone. And I think it's being very careful with the language and the timing, which are really, really important. So when we're thinking about negative phrasing, for example, we're thinking about trying to come away from words like calm down. Calm down will probably make things much more worse, or the children will not understand what we're saying. Stop being silly. It's not putting a label onto that behaviour and calling it a silly behaviour, and that's not appropriate. Be good. What does good look like? We don't even know what good means. Good to one specific child could be different to another. Don't throw the pencil. The language of don't is a word that we should not be using around school. Thinking about another way in which we can deliver that message. Stop running. If we heard sometimes when we say the word stop, children won't hear that word stop, and all they will concentrate on that word running. So think about children running down the corridor. We need to make sure we're using the correct phrasing to make sure that it's consistent across the school. Don't talk to me like that. Again, the sort of connotations that are linked to that language is more negative phrasing, and we need to make sure that we're encouraging the children to be encouraging more pro-social behaviour by delivering that message really, really clearly. Making demands, get here now. Making demands is a difficult situation because actually when you're really thinking about this behaviour, this may work well for some individual children. This is a message that I think we need to think really carefully about as a school. Demands, I think we need to be very mindful that a therapeutic approach sometimes is a more softly approach, but some children do need to be told and with the clear expectations of where they need to be and they need to get there now, that actually there's a level of tolerance that isn't going to be accepted. But for the majority of children, making demands would not be beneficial. We need to be thinking about these specific children. So the language of get here now, get out, do as you're told, give it to me now. They are demands that we want to making sure we're coming away from. However, this thinking about individual children particularly, this may be more beneficial to them. The idea of giving children an open choice. Do you want to, or sometimes it makes it harder for them to decide what they want, what they would like to do. Would you like to go inside, or again, keeping it open sometimes makes it difficult. So it's very difficult depending on the particular child. Sometimes you need to give them one option or another. Be very clear with what those options are. Don't leave it too open. Empowering the behaviour. So children learn that their behaviour will create anxiety for staff or authority figures and will consciously or subconsciously use this behaviour to gain control or reward. As such, the behaviour has become empowering. Empowering the behaviour is usually driven by staff anxiety. Staff may make demands or issue threats that they are unable or unwilling to facilitate. So we have to be very careful when we're delivering these messages to children to make sure that actually what we do carry out, and it has to be appropriate. Whatever we do say, we have to make sure we carry those out with the children. Making demands of a child or a young person can also lead to auto-acceptance of the demand, but it can also lead to auto-rejection of it. The young child or person will not listen to what is being said to them. So when we're thinking about language, we need to be making sure that we're using more positive phrasing, being mindful of the words and the choices that we're using. Providing children with a limited choice. By giving them too many choice options, it makes it harder for them to decide and probably won't engage them in what they're supposed to be doing. We need to be disempowering the behaviour and using de-escalating scripts to make sure that we're calm and we're clear on what we're expecting from the children. So here are some examples of some positive phrasing. Stand next to me. Put the pen on the table. Walk in the corridor. Switch the computer screen off. Walk with me to the library. Stay seated in your chair. By using positive phrases that are clear and uncomplicated, and unambiguous instructions are delivered with clarity. It's often beneficial to support positive phrase with please or thank you. Using please will suggest an element of choice should be reserved for low-level behaviours, and that message of please also makes us think actually that we're begging the children to deliver that behaviour. So making sure that we're using the word thank you ensures that we're expecting the children to comply with that. So for example, walk in the corridor, thank you. That means we're expecting the children to be delivering that behaviour. Neither please nor thank you should be used in high level or dangerous situations. The positive phrase will be delivered assertively without aggression. And the idea of repetition is really important here, just to ensure that the children are understanding a very clear message, and also it may help with those children who find processing slightly difficult. Repetition gives the child more opportunity for the child to process the information or the instruction. Also need to allow for take-up time. All children need time to process. Children in a heightened state of anxiety or in crisis need even more time than they usually do. So it's important to deliver that message clearly, but also to give them time to make sure that they are given the time to process the information or the instruction that you're asking them to carry out. So here are some examples of limited choice. Where shall we talk? Here or in the library? Put the pen on the table or in the box? I'm making a drink. Orange or lemon? Are you going to sit down on your own or with the group? Are you starting your work with the words or a picture? Limited choices often follow directly from positive praises. For example, Peter, we're going inside. Do you want to walk on your own or with me? On your own or with me, Peter? So delivering that message again and again and again. Some limited choices, for example, the drink choice, I'm making a drink, orange or lemon, will reveal those children who are testing boundaries by consistently requesting a third option. So it's really clear to make sure that our limited choice only gives the children two, one or the other. What's also important here is to remember that it's no good offering children choices that aren't available. The choices offered have to be thought through so that you, the adults, are also content with either choice. It's also only a choice if both options are things that would be acceptable to the child. So we have to think really carefully about the choices that we give them. So disempowering the behaviour. Here we're trying to think about extinguishing the behaviour and promoting the pro-social choices. For example, you can listen from there. If a child is deciding to crawl underneath the table, come and find me when you come back. Come back into the room when you are ready. We will carry on when you are ready. So antisocial empowered behaviour needs to be received with as little interaction as possible. We're trying to de-escalate it. We're trying to distinguish the behaviour that the child is showing to promote any more pro-social behaviour as soon as it becomes evident. The message is that antisocial behaviour is pointless and pro-social behaviour is powerful. This empowering also relies on managing the audience, including the adults. Necessary observation for safety reasons should be from a distance with no unnecessary verbal communication. So if the child is putting themselves at risk or being unsafe, then we would need to intervene. That also includes making sure that the rest of the children are also keeping themselves safe too. So disempowering behaviour, we can use the metaphor of providing oxygen. We want to provide oxygen to the pro-social behaviour and reduce the oxygen given to the antisocial behaviour. So let's talk about riding the wave. So when the child becomes and shows difficult or challenging behaviour, the most important thing is giving them the opportunities or catching them getting it right. And we want to oxygenise that behaviour. We want to ignore the difficult behaviour. We want to oxygenise the challenging or difficult behaviour. When disempowerment is used, the student will attempt to reclaim the familiar, comfortable response they gain from staff. When this is ineffective, they will escalate the difficult behaviour to try and reclaim the comfortable, familiar response. If we know a child's internalised limit, we can decide if the behaviour will escalate to a difficult or dangerous behaviour. If it will remain difficult, we can allow the student or the child to ride the wave until they change the direction to gain a familiar and more comfortable response for their pro-social behaviour. At this point, we can catch them getting it right and turn up the oxygen, acknowledge them making those right choices. But if a student's internalised limit is dangerous, we must get ahead of the behaviour and use protective consequences to prevent the familiar behaviour, where disempowerment is not an option, as it would be to escalate the dangerous behaviour with harmful outcomes. So at this point, we turn down the oxygen for the disempowering. We must turn up the oxygen for the others who role model the pro-social behaviour. So here's an activity for you around escalating scripts. Here are three questions that we'd like to think about. What words and phrases did parents use which could generate antisocial feelings? What words and phrases do school staff use that would generate antisocial feelings? And which scripts do we hear peers using that generate antisocial feelings? Pause the video to have time to think. Here's an example of a de-escalation script. Use a child's name. I can see something has happened. I'm here to help. Talk and I will listen. Come with me and. The specific de-escalation script should be used like a 5-point menu. Any element can be chosen as an appropriate response to the aggression or challenge presented by a child. De-escalation script is designed to remove heat from a situation and create space and time. It's important when using this de-escalation script that we remain calm and we use a calm and peaceful voice to make sure that we're not showing our emotions within the delivery of this de-escalation script. So let's talk a little more about de-escalation. Our body language is key in ensuring that we're de-escalating any situation with children. Here you can see two examples of how our body language can escalate behaviour within a child. Getting too close to somebody, use of hand gestures, and towering over them, trying to empower an adult over a child, which can be a really scary situation for any child or even an adult. We want to ensure that we're not getting too close to somebody or a child, going toe to toe, eye to eye, blocking a path, or showing aggressive gestures, or overbearing. It can become a very anxious time for a child or even an adult, so we need to bear that in mind. Making sure we're keeping a close distance, having an open body, of our hands open, not implying any aggressive gestures to somebody. Getting down to their level is very, very important. So if they're on the floor, you need to get down low with them and deliver that message clearly, so we're not empowering or overbearing somebody or a child, to make sure that we're asserting our authority in any particular way. So you want to be keeping a good distance away, standing to the side, relaxed hands, and managing height really, really carefully. So let's talk now about prosocial and antisocial touch. So there are only 3 components that are wrong. When considering the use of physical intervention or restrictive physical intervention, there are only 3 components that can be judged as wrong, and they are a negative impact on the process of breathing, pain as a direct result of a technique, and a sense of violation. What we need to be really clear of here is that physical restraint is an absolute no. There are no reasons for why we need to do any sort of physical restraint of a child unless you have a real issue, and in that case you need to speak to myself or you need to speak to Faye to make sure that we have someone there if we need to. And there's lots of reasons behind that to make sure that we are keeping ourselves safe as well as a child. So from a legally defensible position, national guidance changes and is open to interpretation. Practice should be based on a clear policy that reflects current law and guidance. Antisocial touch. The reason why touch is a difficult situation is because we could be putting ourselves in a difficult situation in terms of restriction of breathing and safe practice. Here are two pictures which are considered as restricting breathing. Now I've seen this done in person, and this is not a very nice thing to experience, not for the child, not for the person doing any sort of restriction, but this is something that is forbidden. We do not restrict any breathing whatsoever. Restricted breathing can occur when an adult's arms, the student's own arms and their clothing is held in a way that could restrict a free movement of the abdomen, diaphragm and chest. Factors such as height, weight, obesity, breathing difficulties and heart conditions could increase the risk. We do not pull and we do not drag a child, mostly due to the reasons where we're not keeping ourselves safe. If a child, for example, does run and they run across a road, that is a reason for us to pull, to stop them from becoming unsafe and avoiding even more dangerous issues. We do not pull or drag. For example, if you look at the right picture, you can see a firm grip on a child's arm, which will most likely lead to bruising, which is what we do not want to happen. And the same goes to pulling hands as well. You see the difference in height. Pulling and dragging would be where staff attempted to move a child holding a hand or wrist and pulling on an extended arm. Factors such as instability of joints, muscle tone and balance could all increase risks. Small, young and developing children would have increased risk of injury. Elevated risk. The following can be a result in a sense of violation, pain and restricted breathing. The use of clothing or belts to restrict movement. Holding a person lying on their chest or back. Pushing on neck, chest or stomach. Extending or flexing of joints. Pulling and tugging. The following can all result in significant injury. Forcing a student up or down steps or stairs. Dragging a child from a confined space. Lifting and carrying, including young students capable of walking. Seclusion, where a person is forced to spend time alone against their will. This requires a court order, except in an emergency. So from that you can tell there are so many factors involved, and this is the last resort only would we need to use any sort of physical restraint. This is something that we do not want to be happening in schools because there's so many risk factors involved. So let's talk about pro-social touch, developing policy. So when we're thinking about touch policy, there needs to be a definition of when, if, why and how we do. If we do lap sitting, physical separation from a child and their parents, carrying, physically comforting a child, steering, guiding or escorting a child, restraining a child, which is restrictive physical intervention. So what is intimacy? Physical intervention should be in the student's best interest and should be conscious of the need to differentiate the attachment to staff from the attachment of key adults such as parents and siblings. Regardless of age, physical intervention should not provide intimacy within a transient relationship. So if we feel a need to move a child, we use this, for example, which is called the open mitten. So the open mitten technique can only be used to move a child away. Our fingers need to be together, our thumb away from our fingers and palms parallel to the floor. The hand should remain in a mitten to avoid the possibility of gripping. Gripping hands can result in bruising consistent with poor practice. Here's an example of closed mitten, which is a different technique. The closed mitten used to draw a student close, fingers and thumb together. The hand should remain in a mitten to avoid the possibility of gripping. And again, we understand that gripping hands can result in bruising consistent with poor practice. Offering an arm to support or guide or escort. Here's an example of a supportive hug, to support, to guide or to escort. Sometimes you may need to get to the child's level to provide that supportive hug. This keeps the child in a safe space, away from our bodies, and ensuring that the child does feel supported, but in a more safe way. Here's an example of the open mitten escort. Keeping our fingers close together to avoid gripping. So here's an opportunity for you to practice some of the techniques that we've shown you today.